For the past couple of years, the housing crisis in Canada has gone from bad to worse, according to a December report by the Parliamentary Budget Office. And it has become a key issue in this election campaign. From rising costs to purchase a home to rental increases and home availability, Canadians across the country are struggling to find an affordable place to call home. For potential homeowners, the average price to buy a home this year will be about $722,000, a 4.7% increase from last year, according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. For renters, a slight drop in price for rental units at the end of last year was welcomed. But according to rentals.ca, rent remained high, averaging just over $2,100 a month. And while more rental units went on the market last year, rental vacancies increased because fewer people could afford the higher costs of these new units. Statistics Canada reported in November that nearly 45% of Canadians were concerned about housing affordability, and those affected the most were between the ages of 20 and 35, with millennials delaying starting a family because they could not afford a suitable home. Habitat for Humanity reported home ownership was becoming a pipe dream for most Canadians, and 82% said the housing crisis was impacting their health and well-being. So what led to this housing crisis?
20 years ago, we had a housing and building boom in Canada. We were building a lot of homes for a long time, and more than half of them were traditional single detached homes. Over that 20 years, the single detached home is basically now on the endangered species list in Canada. And we talked a great game about replacing it with something called the missing middle. And you can see the problem is that the word missing is still there.
The global financial crisis and the property bubble left fewer people able to afford single-family homes, and more people turned to multifamily homes. But they face more time and restrictions with zoning laws and municipal permit requirements.
Our housing crisis can be categorized as too many people and too few homes, which has led to skyrocketing rents, skyrocketing home prices, and that's across the board, whether we're looking at homes for middle-class families or for social housing. Across the spectrum, we have a real shortage of homes in this country.
In May 2024, the Liberal government introduced a plan to address the housing crisis to include more low-cost loans, improving paperwork delays for new builds, and investing in more skilled trades workers. This announcement came a year after Trudeau announced the Housing Accelerator Fund, a $4 billion initiative that provided funding for local governments to fast-track the creation of 100,000 new homes across Canada.
It used to be that the deal was if you worked hard at a good job, you could afford a home. That doesn't seem the case anymore. Younger generations are worried that they won't have a life that looks like how they grew up, like what their parents and grandparents had. Well, that's not fair. Our goal is that no Canadian pays more than 30% of their income towards their home. It's also a plan to make sure that we don't leave the most vulnerable behind, that we keep building housing for people with low incomes, and that we take action to address homelessness so people never have to resort to living in a tent. And it's a Team Canada approach that provides incentives for provinces, territories, builders, and nonprofits to come on board.
Building homes that Canadians need is going to take all of us, government, not-for-profit, and private sector. Mr. Poilievre's plan to cut funding for the infrastructure and housing that cities like Toronto need will only mean that the housing crisis will be longer and deeper. And ultimately, the economy of our cities, large and small, will suffer.
Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre says if his party forms government, they will scrap the GST on new homes under $1 million and cut Liberal housing funds, which he says does nothing to address the housing crisis.
Getting rid of the GST on new home builds will stimulate 30,000 additional homes built every single year, which incidentally will actually generate more income tax revenue for the government without raising rates. That will help cover the cost of the tax cut. But we will also cut bureaucracy. We're going to cut the programs that Liberals themselves admit haven't built any homes. The Accelerator Fund.
To meet Canada's housing needs, the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation says the country needs to build about 3.5 million new homes in the next 5 years.
That's a lot. It's optimistic because that's to rewind the affordability story back to 20 years ago. The parliamentary budget officer says 1.4 million more homes just to catch up before we start to keep up. So let's go with the lower number. That's double our construction. How do you do that? Do you double capacity, double the number of carpenters and laborers and construction workers and plumbers and electricians and roofers? No, that's not going to happen. In fact, we already have a labor shortage, and it's going to get worse because more people are going to be retiring in the next decade than we're bringing in.
There are two big costs when it comes to building new homes. First is development charges and other forms of municipal taxes, which could take up as much of a third of the cost of a new home. So we need to be looking at how we can reform those taxes and still make sure that municipalities have the money they need to pay for infrastructure. And the second is the cost of land. I think we need to have a number of policies that allow us to use land more efficiently. And in many cases, we are going to have to open up more land to development.
The Canadian Real Estate Association is warning more first-time homebuyers are expected to enter the housing market this year. If that happens, it means increased demand, potentially higher prices for home ownership, and more pressure on whichever party forms the next government.